Good morning, everybody. How you doing, Gay?
Good morning. Hey.
Morning. Let me turn my volume up here. All right. All right. So today we are scheduled to talk about living with yourself and how Stoicism tells us we should do that. So Blake, I don't think I've recognized you before. Welcome. See, Amanda and Gay are pretty new to or regulars to the group. Blake, I haven't seen you, so say
Yeah,
hi.
hi. I'm a new. I just saw this group and thought I'd drop in, kind of at the last minute.
Always welcome. Glad to have you. So just starting out, I want to kind of get back to fundamentals of Stoicism here and kind of begin the day on that note. So as we all know, Stoicism is a philosophy that promises happiness through living a virtuous life. Those four virtues Stoicism has pointed out being courage, wisdom, justice, and moderation. And the Stoic Serenity Prayer that holds everything as a dichotomy of control. It says we must identify things that are inside our control and those that are outside our control and not give any worry to anything outside of our control. And now we're talking about how we live with ourselves. We've gone through a couple letters. Blake, just so you know, we're going through each one of Seneca's letters. So we're on like the 10th one. So it's only the 10th group that we've had focused just on the letters. So today's topic is Seneca's 10th letter. And like I said, he's gone through, this letter is about living with yourself, which is a little bit of divergence, if you will, from the earlier letters where he talks about shunning the masses. And then what do you do with yourself when you're in solitude? So this letter to me speaks a lot towards what do you do in your free time when you're left with your own thoughts? And then what are the pitfalls of times that you're left in your own thoughts? And I want to go through the letter real quick and then kind of share an experience that I had that I think is really poignant to this. I'll admit this was kind of a little bit of a tough read for me, given the earlier letters where Seneca talks about, like I said, avoiding masses, avoiding the crowds, don't go with the flow, avoid the mob mentality, think for yourself, be present in every moment. And then the other letter that talks about what it means to be in a state of solitude and how that can be beneficial. And in reading through this, I was like, dude, what gives? Like you're talking about on the one hand, avoiding massives and how that's great. And then on the other hand, how it should be really good to be by yourself. And in this one, you're saying, be very, very careful about being by yourself. And okay, so I just want to go through the letter real quick. So the first section, he talks about exactly what I was just saying, changing his opinion, where he says, on the one hand, avoid the many, avoid the few, and then even avoid the individual. And he says in this story from Crates about how Crates says he comes upon a child, and the child says that I'm communing with myself. And he says, be careful, don't commune with yourself. You're communing with a bad man. And I took that to mean that, first of all, this is a child who says he's communing with himself, and a child in a dialogue with himself is not beneficial because the child, as a sounding board for ideas, isn't going to have the knowledge and wisdom to be able to provide a true sounding board that you would expect from a fellow friend, right? So any child that's left to their own thoughts, in the true sense of child, meaning, I take that as an ignorance of a child kind of a thing, is not to be trusted because those thoughts can develop into what he goes into the second stanza here about, when persons are left in mourning or fearful, or they're left with their emotions, they're not going to be able to make the truest decisions for themselves. And in much the same way that a child can't because they're enveloped in ignorance. If a person is enveloped in emotions, they can't make sound decisions, sound, logical, rational decisions for themselves. So it's kind of the beginning of the warning. And then in the third section, he talks about how he doesn't feel that way towards Lucilius because Lucilius has proven himself. He's got the credibility behind him to show that he is on the path towards sage stoicness. And he's saying, saying the things that I would expect somebody to be confident with themselves to say. But then the last thing, he wraps it up and and what this is, as I take a criticism of Anthinoros. So he says that Anthinoros says that, know that thou art freed from all desires when thou hast reached such a point that thou prayest to God for nothing, except that thou canst pray for openly. So he's saying, Anthinodoros is saying, you've found freedom from all wants when you don't pray for anything, which I think Stoics can all agree that you're free when you can say, I don't want anything else. But Anthinodoros takes it a step further and says, except when you can't pray, or except when you can't openly pray, like except for the things that, if you're praying in open church, say for instance, and this is, we'll talk about the religion aspect of this in a second, but if you're praying in open church and you're praying to God for something, you need to shed all of those prayers in order to be fulfilled. So if you have nothing to pray for God for as far as your wants, except for other little things, those little things don't matter. And here I think Seneca is saying, no, 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 it's even those little things. So no matter what you're praying to your gods for, you have to be free from all wants. So it's generally this idea that, as I took this, man by themselves, without wisdom, without really friends to kind of have those sounding board of ideas, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. And I'll share with you a story when I was left to my own devices that got me in a lot of trouble. So I, right about the time that I found Stoicism, like infancy, like I think I was still listening to Epictetus, like we're talking first or second week kind of a thing here. And I was getting ready to lose my job. I had been told that my company had been sold, and like within like 3 or 4 months, I was going to be essentially laid off. My wife was pregnant. We needed to move. I had all this stuff going on in my life, and I was trying to figure out the best way to handle it all. And so I sunk into myself for like a week, and I tried to devise this plan that I thought would be best for me and my family trying to survive financially. And I came up with this plan that I was going to take this opportunity where I wasn't, so I was practicing law at the time. I was working for a company, and I didn't want to go and work for a firm. Like that had always been my biggest fear, that I was going to be stuck in a billable hour cycle with my entire life revolved around the quota of hitting billable hours each week. And I wanted nothing to do with that. But I knew I didn't have the experience to make myself marketable to go back and have an in-house job. So I essentially tried to hatch this plan of like, how can I work doing exactly what I want, as little as I want, and still make the money that I was working. So in like a 2-week period, I came up with this idea where I was going to write my life story. And I was going to do it in such a way where it was, it's almost like I was trying to think of the writer who did it. I can't, but this idea where it's like a kind of a true to life, like, it's so delusional. It's funny even saying it out loud now. So it was going to be my life story with like kind of these like tidbits of like fiction in there. And it was going to be up to the reader to figure out what was true and what was not. And I thought it was a really cool idea because there are a lot of certain aspects of my life that I can't talk about, from the military and stuff like that. And I was like, ooh, there's going to be some sexiness here, kind of. Ultimately, as I sit here now, it was the worst plan ever. But that's what I thought I was going to do. So I was like giving up on law. I'm going to go be like a published author. I'm going to have this summer off. It's going to be great. It's going to be the life that I wanted. And then as I started like in my head, and I hatched this whole plan between like, and I had nothing to do because I was on this like sabbatical of like 2 weeks, right? So every day I'd go out and like I'd mow my lawn, I'd work in my shed, I'd take my dog for a walk. When I was working out, every moment of every day was spent hatching this plan, like how I was going to make this work, and bolstering my ideas about what I thought were shit, and then like justifying them to myself. The point of, or not the point, but a huge point of the story is I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't go to my friends. I didn't go to my boss. Like I was hatching this plan all in myself, right? So I got to the point where I said, you know what, this is ready to be consumed by the world. I'm going to start. I'm going to now start writing this book. And I will say that I did run it past my neighbor at one point when I was out mowing my grass, and he kind of gave me a little side eye, like, all right, brother, you do you. Good luck. That was it. That was really the only person that I ever told, right? So I start writing this, and I'm like 2 or 3 days into it, and it's crap. and I realized I am not a great writer. I am not the next, Mark Twain. I am not at all going to change people's lives through my story. And then I start panicking, like, oh my God, Eric, what have you done? Like, you can't write. Like, this plan was perfect. Like, on paper, it made sense to everybody in the world, who was me, and that was it. And I didn't share it with anybody. And I realized, like, I don't have the skills to write a book. I don't know how to write that way. I don't have the creative base to be able to write novels like that. And I freaked out. And I had one night where I literally just went nuts. I'm like, oh my God, what have I done? Like, I have oversold myself to myself. And I realize now how dumb this is, and I should have never done it. Long story short, I feel like I wasted like 2 weeks of my life, and I ended up back in a firm and all of these things. But it was this time where I didn't run these thoughts by anybody. I just thought in my own head, like, this is what's best for me. I know me. Nobody knows my passions like I do. Nobody knows what my happiness will look like. I knew what was best for me in my own head. And afterwards, everybody was like, Eric, dude, we could have told you this was a terrible idea. There are many facets to it that could make sense, but there's no way in hell that this plan was ever going to come to fruition because you didn't let us know, kind of a thing. Like, we could have told you, my friends, my family, everybody around me could have let me know that this plan was so terrible. So as I was reading through Seneca's letter here, that's what I was thinking. Like, my God, I am so guilty of this. When I get in my own head and I think I know what's best for me, and I shun the wisdom that's out in the world and shun the wisdom that my friends and family have, I'm essentially setting myself up for disaster and failure. And I can tell you guys, every time that and I am one to naturally retreat, like, I'm the guy at the parties in high schools who would go for the walks and just walk home. Anytime things get hard, I'll just slip away, my little Irish goodbye, and then you'll never see me again. And I go off and think to myself. And then when I'm ready to face the world, I'll emerge again. I haven't done that in a long time, but that was me throughout pretty much the 20s and 30s. And each and every time I would do that, I would come up with these ideas, like how I'm going to reemerge in the world, like how I'm going to come back stronger and wiser and better. And every damn time something would happen, or not something would happen, but every time that I would hatch these plans, they were always foolish. They were always, because I didn't have the sounding board of somebody saying, I want to interject a little wisdom here and show you that your ways may not be the best. So that's my little story about how I've like interpreted this letter from Seneca, in that, there's a lot of danger to be had when you're with your own thoughts. And I love the point he makes about when you're fearful, when you're mourning, when you're enveloped in emotions, is when you're most dangerous, because you think from a place that is the antithesis of logic and ration. And in those times are when you get yourself in most trouble. So, that's my thoughts about his letter this week. And I'm interested to hear how you guys think about, what you do for two things. One, if you have any stories, of course, of the pitfalls of thinking for yourself. And then two, obviously, what you do to kind of get outside your own head. I'm really good about never really getting in to my head anymore. I kind of have mechanisms in place because I've seen the pitfalls of everything I did in my 20s and 30s to know that my thoughts, when left to their own devices, go back to my baseless desires. And my base desires are wealth, fame, and not having to work ever again. Like, that's what I always go to. Like, when I think about, like, Eric, what are your dreams? I don't want to work, and I want to be famous. I want people to recognize me and pay for my drinks everywhere I go. Like, those stupid, dumb, ape-like thoughts that we have, that's where I go. So when I start thinking about all of that shit, that's where I go. So I want to hear from you guys and what you have to say about this letter and all of that good shit. So anybody?
I'll say something. What I was thinking of when you were going over all that was, I know Jordan Peterson is like a controversial person these days, but he has this thing about, like, it kind of takes a village to render a person socially acceptable. Because it's like over time, because like when you kind of spend too much, it's basically exactly what you said, like what you described. It's like when a person spends too much time by themselves, like bad habits can emerge and things like that. So like you kind of need somebody to call you out and like say, hey, what you just did was like maybe you shouldn't do that. It's kind of weird or something. Just things like that. Like, or you're going the wrong way. You're thinking about things. You're approaching things the wrong way. That kind of thing. So, and also I've heard that um, kind of like when we're alone, we can almost be like marionettes in a way, like where we're kind of our we become like slaves to our own like impulses. Like when no one's watching. Like you'll just like because you're not there's almost like a lack of accountability there, like if no it seems like there is, like that you'll just like kind of end up giving into you know temptation or whatever it is, like indulging too much in different things. And that's kind of what I was thinking about when you're going over all that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Blake. And so your first point of having what I call it, like the social sounding board of the people around us, right? And I think that it has a lot of utility in a lot of different areas of life. And I certainly should have used my social sounding board at the times when I was hatching up my idea for my life story book, right? But I always caution people against the idea that you should always go with the flow. And Seneca talked about going with the masses, and be careful not to go through the motions of going through the mom mentality type thing. But like you pointed out, Blake, is there is a lot of utility in letting the marketplace of people out there, determine what you're doing is appropriate or not. At the same time, don't ever be afraid to think for yourself, right? There's definitely a bright line there about my general rule is take a step forward and see if I'm comfortable. And if everybody around me is comfortable, then I take another step forward. And I've always liked pushing boundaries that way. And I found that that's been the best recipe for me. But like you said, the first step is taking a look around, right? It's not about taking a step forward and seeing how I feel and if I'm comfortable with what I've done, but it's also making sure everybody else is comfortable with what I've done. So if you have this grand plan that you're going to be the next Batman superhero and you're going to, arm yourself to the teeth with every weapon known imaginable, and you said, I'm going to go fight crime and do the ultimate good, and then you have this plan all hatched in your head, and then you step outside and the world goes, whoa, hold on. No. This is not what we want, right? That's the sounding board that you definitely need to say, okay, my plan may have been a little off base here. Motivation's great. Execution of that plan may need some fine tunement. But at the same time, I'll tell you, don't ever let go of that thought that you should be the next Batman, right? It's just your plan needs a little fine tuning. So absolutely agree with you. And to the second point that you made, I had it in my head. I can't remember it. So I'll just go to Dominic now. Dominic, how you doing, man?
Pretty good, Eric. How you doing?
Good.
Everybody else. For me, anyway, from when it comes to what I'm hearing, that internal person's always there. A lot of us just never observe, and then you have to apply discernment to know the difference. You coexist outside, but you exist always from within. Now, the concept of lacks, wants, it's kind of the metaphor I would have to give is a farmer teaches the child, son, everything's already out there. Your needs are there, but what you're lacking is your skills. So I'm going to educate you that there are certain crops that can be out there. Same with a person that's a hunter. So the wants and lacks is most people think that they have needs, which they do, but what do they lack? What skills do they lack? Do they have the strength? Some people have the lack of discernment, wisdom. So they'll use a underdeveloped thinking process or reasoning or even their feelings. It's usually most people, this is why we have wars, because people always led by their underdeveloped feelings. Because if you truly are engaged in your feelings and understand it, you would question things. So why am I fighting for a flag? But again, this is where discernment plays a major role. Once a person gets away from that, then what happens is they're going to use the reaction. They're going to probably use reason to a certain point. And again, this is where the guy that goes on his own becomes aware of the Plato's cave ideal. You've always been there. You've never been out there. The masses are just going to teach you how to react to things. But the discernment's to know the difference. That am I actually ever outside when I'm looking somewhere else? Anyway, that's for now, Eric. Anyway.
Yeah, Don, thank you so much for saying that. And you're absolutely right, right? That discernment is, and you're not able to discern those things without others instilling in you. Instilling is not a great word, but the practice of letting others kind of apply their thoughts to what you're doing in your actions, right? The discernment that you talk about, Dominic, I don't think is capable of even coming into a skill set of a human without going through the practice as a child, right? When you do something in a social situation and it's not acceptable, people immediately let you know. And you start that practice of discerning whether it's socially appropriate according to them or socially appropriate according to kind of a universal theme, right? So for instance, somebody that grew up somewhere where it was acceptable for stealing, right? The masses, if it's a low income area and it's just everybody knows that it's fine if you walk into a candy bar or walk into a store and you steal a candy bar, come out with it, start eating it, nobody's going to criticize you. Your friends wouldn't criticize you. So you may adopt that activity as normal to you. And then later on in life, when you're applied to the same situation, somebody says, oh, no, no, no. And then that's your opportunity for discernment of, okay, I'm older, I'm wiser, I have the wisdom to know that what I did younger is not the same now, but a lot of people don't get that. But I think you're absolutely right that is the key. That is 100% the key to applying that social sounding board to your own thoughts. Because if you have that disconnect between that discernment, you're going to end up in a hotel amassing guns waiting to shoot somebody because you don't understand that one thing is not socially acceptable while the other is. And it's that ability to discern that thing. And everybody has that. That's the one thing that I love that you said, Dominic, is everybody inherently has that within them, so totally agree with you. Thank you. Anybody else have any thoughts before I start my other tangent?
Hey, Eric, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me. I normally do my manuscript, but I use my phone this time to take notes, so my thinking's a little different if you know how you will take things from your brain differently. If you use your laptop, then your computer, then your journal. That's why they say journal daily. So Stoicism is HARDAF. So purposeful solitude is important, and it is valued among thinking men or humans, like when we give professors tenure and pay them to go on sabbaticals, also known as being fucking stoic. So like Muhammad, Moses, and the original Jane, who went off alone before they came back with a proper way to explain their indoctrination, I'm going to try my best to explain mine to you because I love Stoicism. Okay, so my ex-husband hated when I took sabbaticals, which are purposeful, silent retreats, the longest being 3 months. And it just means that I withdraw and I stay in solitude. But I'll journal daily, which I already do. And this time I'm doing it without interjecting any form of conversation with a living human being. Sometimes I do listen to podcasts and or programs that I have pre-selected for the silent retreat. And I do tend to lean in on French programming as I am bilingual. And I drought my dominant tongue in order to strengthen my weaker one. I learned that from Dr. Norman Deutsch, a neuroscientist who lives in my downtown here in Toronto. I'm in Toronto, Ontario, guys. And so he's at the University of Toronto. And so, okay, so I really, really like him because I like the way he thinks, and it doesn't take much for me with a man because I'm sapiosexual, which just means I'm not hypnotized by a person's exterior protruding things. Like I said before, I don't fall in love because falling is indicative of an injurious act. So I use purposeful interactions to get a hold of these protruding interests that lay in people's hippocampi. So I'll always campaign to meet you at your top membrane, which is the most important protrusion that a man can have. But I'm also like polarity because I rest in my femininity. And so I like men to be men and alpha, and which does not mean like they're going to beat me down or be like a fuck boy, but like The Rock, he's alpha and he's a really meek man. So to all men, AKA human beings avoiding stoicism, stop yourselves from thinking with gum smacking mentality, also known as emotional immaturity, also known as omega man, okay, not alpha male. Because if you're not thinking like a stoic, you're in row ZZ. Because stoicism is the bedrock of a legitimate self-governing system, which allows us to diminish other people's independence from being the governing authority in our minds. For in the province of the mind, what one believes to be true is true or becomes true. That was said by another neuroscientist, can't remember his name now, but okay, Stoicism allows us to dig deeply, also known as inner work, in order to overcome trauma, as we cannot survive in a decaying vessel. La tête, les gens. So I suggest everyone practice Stoicism in the same way that fundamentalists, we talked of religion a little bit, that because when you're religious, they will read a passage over and over again, sticking to each and every doctrine. When we're Stoic, we'll read our passages, superimposing them onto our lives, because Stoicism is a way of thinking, not a recipe for one fish dish. So as an example, someone who is religious would continue to say knowledge is power, while someone practicing Stoicism and having mulled over that expression for a while will recognize the caveat emptors, as knowledge is in and of itself powerless, but the application of knowledge is power. So I don't know, Ralph's not here, but he would understand this because he's a trainer. So he works people out and they already know what they should do, but they are simply not applying it. So they remain powerless, both figuratively and literally, even though you might have told them a million times what to do, this, that, and the other. So quickly, another one, don't hate the player, hate the game. I will have to say, I hate them both in what I am doing with raising awareness and going one-on-one up against pedophiles and minor attracted people. In the field, our government has us kicking debates about upon. And for the record, being Stoic, I never like to give people the answers. And that's what they want. I mean, my friends and my acquaintances, they hate that about me the most because they want my advice. Hence, I have to stay in solitude opposed to giving the answer, because being Stoic, I already know that they'll become dependent upon me and not exercise their own method of thinking. And I learned that lesson from my father, who took a walk with me once when I was a teenager, and we went from my mother's house to downtown, which was maybe a half-hour walk, and it took us 2 hours. And that's because I was being stopped constantly, and every time people wanted to ask advice. And my father said, if you allow people to use you to do their thinking, you won't have time to think for yourself. So there you are, Eric, my 2 cents for the Stoic Sunday.
Gay, thank you so much. That is so amazing, all of the wisdom that you spit at us each and every day. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. So many points that I wish I could have gone back and touched on that you had there. But I know, so you're going through your divorce and you're fighting the good fight in trying to essentially cease the act of pedophilia. And my God, those are such higher, achievements to reach for than I think anything I could say that I'm doing currently. So I'm in awe of that, and thank you every day, every week that you come by and remind me of that.
And I'm going to remind you that you said you might jump on this bandwagon, so I'm going to be reaching out to you. Don't worry.
Absolutely, and I very well might be. One thing that hit me a lot in reading, not hit me a lot, but one thing I kept going back and rereading again, trying to really see if I could understand what Seneca was talking about in the first section there, where he talks about the from Crates or Crates, talking about the kid walking by himself. And my God, I felt like that kid so many times, and I felt like that kid in such an arrogant way, because when people would come to me and say, "Hey, you don't know what you're talking about," I would, in a complete lack of humbleness, say, "Fuck off, I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've had the experience that you don't have, to say that I know how to get through this. I don't need your wisdom. In fact, I'm going to be a stronger person when I figure this out on my own." And I wish to God somebody, I was about to say, I wish somebody would have told me this in my 20s and 30s, but who didn't? I'm sure everybody that I came across has said that exact same thing to me, and said, "Stop being stupid, stop being, this immature kid. You don't know what's best for you." Of course, the message was lost probably in its delivery, because it wasn't, how I needed it. I probably needed somebody to hit me across the face with a sledgehammer. But what's even more funny, I think about, so I have this idea, right, that I did everything in my life as best as I saw fit, and then I knew what I was doing and it was best for me, and I kept going along with it. And then I say things now as about to be a 42-year-old man saying, I wish people would come along and have would show me this idea earlier. And I talk about having a bigger sledgehammer to wake me up. And I was just thinking about this week, that I was in a really bad motorcycle accident in 2006, like should have been dead kind of a thing. If you ever seen the scars on my face, that's probably what it's from. And I forget about it often. I don't think about it. I don't have that mentality of like, oh, every day I have now is a gift because I should have been dead then kind of a thing. But I think about it in terms of this context, because at that time, just to give you context, I was on a motorcycle doing 90 miles an hour on the I-5 in LA, wearing flip-flops, shorts, no gloves, probably a tank top, and just my helmet. Thankfully, I was wearing a helmet. And I think at the time I was going to drop something off for a friend, then go to the beach and hang out with friends, like a Tuesday or Wednesday day. That's the life I lived kind of a thing, what I was doing with my job at the time. But I was living that kind of happy-go-lucky, do what I want attitude with all my free time. And I had this motorcycle accident that completely changed the trajectory of my life, because all the friends that I thought I had in Southern California, they didn't come to my bedside. I wasn't the party animal anymore. I didn't have the money to give them to party anymore. I was not the source of fun that they needed, so they stopped seeing me. So a lot of my friends stopped hanging out with me in Southern California. Ended up moving back to the East Coast. A friend who kind of helped take care of me. And I'm not about like divine intervention or things like that, but I talk about like, man, I wish somebody would have, shown me. It's like, dude, what bigger event in your life did you need to tell you to slow down, that the way you were going was not the best way for you to live your life, other than a debilitating motorcycle accident that I think put me in the hospital for like 5 days straight, something like that, in a coma. So, it's funny that I say all of these things all the time. Like, I wish I had people that would, that were there in my life to give me these stoic ideas, but it's nothing more than kind of the addict's mentality of, you can't help people unless they want to be helped, sort of a thing. And you can't really let people see the light until they really want to see it, kind of a thing. And in this letter, when he talks about that kid, it's like, my God, I was that kid for so many years, walking down the street, just constantly hurting myself because I wasn't asking for help. I wasn't going to my friends or family. I just wanted to be so prideful that I could do it myself. And a lot of times I did. A lot of times I would come out on top, and I'd have people going, my God, you've come from nothing and you've made great bounds in your life. How awesome that is. But at the same time, if anybody knows any modicum of psychology, we're all just scared kids inside. And the scared child that was inside me while achieving all of these things was just waiting to be found out. And that accident to me was the kind of that found out moment, because I realized that what I thought was this circle of friends around me, that we were completely hedonistic in everything we did. Like, we were going to Vegas every week. We were partying in Mexico, just living the time of our life as like a mid 20-year-old. And the moment that I lost my attractiveness, not to say I was ever attractive, but you go through a motorcycle accident, 90 miles an hour, and you're not going to be that much more attractive anymore. But, so I lost my attractiveness. I lost my ability to give them money. I had just come back from contracting, like with a military contractor. So I had thousands and thousands of dollars to blow, and they lost that source of income. So I wasn't their ride to Vegas anymore. And how quickly each one of those friends just disappeared. And because they disappeared, I had to find my own path in life, So I'm very glad that I don't have those people in my life anymore. I have people like you instead to put me on the path. So here's another recent example of how I've been able to successfully use the sounding board of other people to get out of my own head. So I've had this thought recently. You guys may have heard me, that I wanted to try to use this passion that I have for stoicism in some way, shape, or form, and monetize it, make it a job, see if I can help other people on a bigger platform. And not like in a way where I'm asking anybody to give me money like you, but see if I can help coach corporations or people and things they do or something like that. So I've been thinking about this a long time and kind of ruminating about it. And then I've opened that idea up to this group before. And there's a lot of people in this group who I have a lot of respect for and their opinions and things like that. So last week, and I love that Dr. Ryan's here, Dr. Lee's here, so he can attest to this. So I've opened up this meeting to Wednesday night, or not Wednesday night, so weekly meetings during the week, thinking that, I want to try to use stoicism as it helped me to help other people's problems, and see if we can get into these lively discussions about it. So last week, I thought in my head, to gain credibility in this space, if I'm going to consider myself kind of I hate to even say it, but like a stoic advisor or an advisor that practices stoicism. I hate saying, calling myself a stoic because I'm not there. I'm just practicing it and trying to be better. But if I'm gonna put myself in the space, I'd like to have some credibility. And I had some issues with some externals that I thought were not healthy. I looked to drinking a little bit too easy for my at the end of the day. I was looking to weed to help me go to sleep a little bit too easily. And I was taking dick pills a lot when I was with my wife intimately, but I didn't really need them. If you guys have ever taken them, they're just kind of fun. You don't need them. You get this is way too much information, but it's fun, right? So I said, you know what? Look, as a practicing Stoic, I've got to find happiness within myself. Aside from anything external, I should be able to find happiness within myself. So I said, you know what? I'm going to cut it all out this week. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to search for my happiness in any way of anything external whatsoever, because I would like to have the credibility of people that I may help in the future to say, hey, look, you don't need to find happiness in externals the same way that I don't need to find happiness in externals. I've shed these things. I'm a cynic. I'm, just wandering the streets in my clothes without anything that this world may give me. And I'm happy, right? And so that was Monday morning. I journal about that. Tuesday night, I'm by myself. I had a shit day at work. I'm by myself in a restaurant. I'm ordering dinner, and I go, well, what am I going to drink? I've journaled that I shouldn't have booze. I shouldn't have, any of these external stuff. What am I going to drink? And where I was at, it was like water. That was my only option: water or soda pop. I don't drink soda pop, so I said, all right, well, it's water. And I was like, I've had such a crap day that I know for a fact that if I get that water, I'm going to continue to experience these negative feelings. But if I get a beer, it's going to change my mindset. It's going to make me a little bit happier. So damn it, just get the beer. So I got the beer. And I felt not any shame or guilt or anything like that, because the logical part of my brain said, look, you just wanted a beer. You're not an addict. You're doing this in a virtuous way. You're doing it in moderation. But I felt guilt and shame because of the promise that I had made to myself. And on that call with some folks this is Wednesday night now, we're on the Stoic, open discussion thing. And I told everybody, so look, I got this problem that I promised myself I wasn't going to have any booze this week. And I had a beer last night. We talked about it, and they helped me walk through it. And they said, look, Eric, this isn't, it's the fact that you tried to rip off the Band-Aid too quick, right? Like, just from a human modern psychology standpoint, you can't just go cold turkey on 3 vices that you've introduced into your life all at once and expect it's going to work, kind of a thing. So my premise was okay, but me using that sounding board of other people and getting out of my own head, because in my head, I thought it was perfect, right? Like, I'm going to have this story of credibility to all of these Stoic followers and be like, my God, Eric Ruth can shed all of these things in one fell swoop. Look how great and powerful Stoicism is for him. When I got out of my head, all of my Stoic friends said, you're a fucking fool, dude. What are you thinking? Like, I understand the premise, but your practice is terrible. So that's my most recent example I can give you guys about how getting out of your own head, even when you think it's the best thing for you, can give you really the direction that you need to go. So there's my latest story. Dominic, please.
Give me a second. Sorry, guys. I'm just
Yeah,
a bunch of other things. I was hearing you as I was hanging out with my cat. Is discernment a thing to do or be? It's a pondering. The whole ideal of thinking, I have bad habits, you're still not in the discernment mode. It's awareness. Once you're aware that you are human and you have habits, programs. Now, people that cling to, say, drinking, for example, it's usually some sort of feelings that's involved in it. They think if I put enough effort to resist it, that'll go away. Well, you might as well turn on the radio when you hear a noise in the car. Distraction now. Like I said, discernment. As you said, actually, get out of my head. No, be aware, whatever's going through your head. Because that's a whole stumbling process. Even when we talk about negative and positive, if you're applying the ideal of likes and dislikes, you're not philosophizing anymore. You're not even stoic anymore. You're not observing the observed. Those are energies, hence why we have the word energy and motion, emotions. Your reason is emotions. Your thinking, your senses, those all are energy and motion. Now, if you're trying to produce a better result in the acting realm, then use your reason. Okay, so if I move my hand here, and then I can make a better shot. Then there's some people that'll find out they have a gift, they're visualizing creatures. They can ponder from within, and your body will, because we forget, this vessel that we're in, we didn't create it. And if you did, then you have to start playing the wonderful game. Well, then who's breathing when I'm talking to Dominic or other people? Who's running my liquids? That's the rational mind. But there's also the intuitive mind. All of it's mind. I know people like to play different words, but the energy of the mind and the brain are two different things. You have many receivers in your vessel. But if you're struggling with something, then you have to actually understand what is some of the foundation of it. Not just one. What are some of the foundation? Have I been brought up in a program where my parents told me this or that? Traditions die not because, sorry, my apologies. Traditions die because you don't question them. You should challenge traditions. If my forefathers said, this is how we farm, I should still be able to question it. Because if not, it will die, meaning that we'll ignore it. And eventually some other culture or generation or some other new technology will come in and say, well, we no longer do this. I'm like, yeah, we still do. There's people in the world that still do farming and hunting and all that other stuff. Those are our needs. Anyway, I went on. Sorry about that. Everybody here?
No, thank you, Dominic. And you're absolutely right about, I mean, like everything we have is in our head, right? And the one thing that I always come back to the most in Stoicism is when I talk to people is, you know, what do you have control over versus what you don't have control over? And it's everything. It's everything. And it's everything in the sense of like statistical analysis. When I say everything, it's everything, because what you can control in this world right now, what you see in this world compared to what you can control, which is your own mind, it's nothing. It's nothing, because your mind and your own actions are so infinitely small compared to the rest of the world that they almost shouldn't matter, right? So then for the individual who holds that mind, what can you change? It's everything, because it's your mind, it's your perception, it's everything outside of the world. So when I talk to people in the very, very beginning stages of trying to apply Stoicism to fix their problems, it's understanding that dichotomy. And then the second step of actually identifying is very easy for me, because I recognize that it's everything that you can't control and it's almost nothing that you can't. For everybody else, that chipping away of the ideas of what you can and can't control is very painful. It's a very hard attachment to let go of. And then once you're able to do that, and the attachment also needs to be, and I think Dominic may have touched on this a little bit, but the attachment to an identity and a narrative. You know, it's not just an attachment to physical things or people, but it's also the attachment to ideas and the narratives you've been telling yourself about what your childhood was and who's to blame for whatever else. When you realize that I have no control over that, but I do have control over the power in my own brain and what I can do, that's where you start to see that awareness actually start to affect things. Because Dominic, you're absolutely right. Awareness is everything, whether it's in Stoicism or psychology. The moment that you're aware of something, that changes. It's like the light turns on, right? And that to me is that's like one of the beauties of Stoicism. I love when people finally understand, like, oh shit, I can't control my sister's actions, so I'm not going to think about her anymore. I can't control what my mom did to me when I was 8. I'm not going to think about it anymore. Of course, you take the lessons learned. You always need to take something away from, you don't always need to, but if you're going to spend any attention or any time with a past event, something that's imagination, then it needs to have something in line with your purpose. And if it's going to be a lesson taken away that I don't need to spend any time thinking about others' actions because of what somebody did to me 25 years ago, then that's it. Then you move on, right? But that awareness of, you know, your mind, your actions is all you can control, to me has been, like I said, been as big fit I've had. So Dominic, what else you got?
I'm going to challenge a speech that you have, Eric. I hope you can at least ponder it. What is the definition of control? Because I think you're actually using it in a very delusional sense. But I'm going to ask you, what do you think the word control is? Because you say it numerous of times.
Sure. So control is the ability to effectuate a change in something of your own doing.
So it's a doing process then. Okay.
What's that?
So it's a doing process for you then. Okay, so what about the being part? When you're observing something, are you actually controlling it, or are you just kind of just watching it? You're being the observer, because I'm hearing you say the word observer and control. Those are two different energies.
I disagree with you because I think
Oh,
you
well,
can control your observations.
It's
Because
not
if
about
I'm
agreeing or disagreeing with me right now, Eric. It's about you actually defining yourself, what the word is. Agreeing or disagreeing, that's one's likes and dislikes. So you're trying to control the environment by saying you disagree with me. I've just shared something on an ideal. Who I am is not agreeable or disagreeable. I'm sharing an ideal. What is the definition for you on control? It's for you to ponder. And if you're reacting, that's one thing, but you could be responsible. Most people will become accountable when they learn how to respond. And sometimes response comes in a form of silence. I don't know, Dom. And if I did know, then I should apply discernment. Do you control your body, or do you have responsibility for the vessel? Can you manipulate certain things? Yes. What is control? Control sometimes is usually the emotion, the energy that I'm trying to resist something, or I want something, which is fine. But what are you trying to control? Thoughts we don't control. We use them. We are experiencing thoughts. You can manipulate it. That's why we have the variations of languages. Got to remember, Stoicism a lot of times was done by people that were pretty well off. They've had all their needs fulfilled, usually at either themselves. If they're too busy obtaining it, they're not going to have time to actually philosophize. It's usually people that are pretty well off that are going to philosophize, unless I think the young lady was talking about it, where you go into a state of meditation to find out, okay, is this the best time to plant my seeds? So I'm just asking out loud. I'm not asking you to have to respond to it, but to ponder what is control for you? Because I hear it numerous of times. A lot of times when people say the word truth, they're not living the truth. That's why they keep on saying it. I use the word honesty because I'm not always honest with myself. And when I do become genuinely honest with myself, I no longer talk about it. It's like morale. You can intellectualize it, but if you're actually practicing morale, you're not trying to defend it or attack it. You're just being it. Hence the word, so be it. I'm playing with words, obviously, Eric, here. That's all.
Okay. Well, you asked me for my definition of control, and I responded because I have practiced and narrowed my definition of what control is to me. And again, my definition of control are things that you can affect change upon. Now, if you're talking about what you can control versus, I think what you said of being, I think you mean that in an active versus passive sense. And if you can certainly control passive activity. Again, observing. If I'm observing this room, I can stop observing by closing my laptop. I'm no longer observing you. And I'm going to push back a little bit on saying that I'm disagreeing, because whether it's disagreeing with I'm disagreeing with the words that you said, in the sense that, again, I think that the only control that you have is your actions. And I think you can control your thoughts. You can't control what thoughts come into your head a lot of times, but you can control how you're going to respond to those thoughts. And it doesn't happen overnight. If somebody in this room were to make a string of words that could make the blood in my face boil, I would not be able to respond to you. I could react. I haven't done enough to shield myself from the emotion quick enough to be able to respond. But in the sense of you asking me what I can and can't control, I think I'm a practiced enough Stoic to be able to answer that quickly. Now, whether you consider the temporal barrier between which I respond to you quick or short as a response or a reaction, I'll leave that for you to discern. But to me, control is anything that you can affect. Now, can I affect my body? Certainly. Can I affect my body in certain ways, in very acute situations? Yes. Can I raise my hand to slap somebody? Yes. Can I get up off this bed and walk away? Yes. Can I stop my body from having cancer? Probably not. And one of the things I've talked about recently that I feel is a chink in the armor of Stoicism is when you try to sell it to somebody, we sell it to people in a lot of hypotheticals, just like we've talked about. When we talk about, do you have control over your body? We can all sit here and say, no, ultimately you do not. You don't have control of what happens to your body. You don't have control over anything in this world other than what's between your ears, right? But you do have control over your body right now in the sense of your actions. Ultimately, no. And I think the selling point of Stoicism of, you need to be prepared for if you get cancer or you lose faculties or you can't do this, you can't do that. They're all hypotheticals that we're trying to prepare ourselves for. But a practicing Stoic is prepared for those things, and they don't actively try to, and this is what I did last week, is you don't try to actively simulate suffering, because you're not going to get anything from that. Simulating suffering in a stoic way is not going to bring you any wisdom. Suffering is to be endured when it has to be endured. Otherwise, you're putting yourself in situations that you don't need to be in. You're falling on a grenade when nobody else is around. You're gaining life lessons that don't need to be learned yet, kind of a thing, right? So when I try to sell stoicism to people, the one thing I try to avoid are hypotheticals. They just focus on what's in front of you right now. Everything else is imagination, right? So why are we focusing on imagination? Focus on the reality before you. So
Can I just add to Eric that just as just some encouragement, because when you're saying you want to spread stoicism, I know we're not missionaries, but it is so necessary, because when I'm in therapy, like even marriage counseling and my one-on-one therapist, when I'm saying something and then they're like writing it down, it's because they aren't practicing stoicism. Like they're going, that's a nugget. And it's like, yeah, like you're an actual psychiatrist. And I say, you don't lie in therapy, you lie in bed, if we were going to lie. And it's like, you need to know that. Then when you're with a partner, you don't undermine them, especially if it's in a marriage, because can you imagine you in a boat with someone and you're chained by the anchor and you throw them over, you're going to go follow them. So you, even if they're not doing what you like, you can't turn against them, because it's turning against yourself. So you must be able to be comfortable in dis-ease. And like, I'm just saying, and as well, I too laid my motorcycle down. I taught 3 women how to ride a motorcycle, and I had ended up getting a motorcycle burned there, but you can't see it right now because it's been so long ago. And so I like, my heart went out to you. I went,
thanks, Dominic.
My own personal experience, again, I'm using some of my own personal experience. When I've had injuries, the discernment is, once I realized the resistance to pain was a fraction of suffering, then I had to really become aware of my attachments to my pleasures and my comforts. That is where myself anyway, and I've talked to a lot of people about it, and you pick up the energy from them, they're more attached to their comforts and their pleasures than they are resisting something. It's like talking about death. If you've never experienced it, then let's only talk about what you do, what you are aware of, whether it's in thoughts or it's in the physical. So when people are always looking for a positive outcome, I say, well, then I have to take you to the car and introduce you to the concept of positive and negative and grounding. Those things have to exist. That's why we have the concept of yin and yang, wisdom and understanding. Most people just get into the awareness of knowing. But once you start learning discernment, you're going a little bit beyond what we call knowledge. You become aware of things, which is a part of knowledge. Then you say, oh, so then if I lost $1 million, yeah, you're going to discover all your attachments. Now, for most people, they're trying to resist, and that's why they only use pain as the only ideal of what they think suffering is. This is why certain teachings, like in the Buddhism, they're talking about attachment, attached to the mind, but they've never guided the mind, like the ego. The ego never gets guided. It's just usually a resistance. I've even heard you say, Eric, there's the reaction part, but then you have to ponder, who runs my body when I'm asleep? Who runs my liquids when I'm hearing other people? That's the ego having to spin itself now and say, okay, let's not play the self-aware game now. Let's play the aware of the self. Let's not play self-love. Let's do the loving of the self. Let's rip a new hole in the ego to see if it's going to stay true. People that are very egotistical, if they're genuinely true, you should be able to get it in their face and say, oh, that's interesting, Dominic. But if they start defending and attacking, that's their ego talking.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Completely agree. The ego always has to be right. Right? The ego always has to come out on top, whether it's ultimately right or not. The ego has to win. The ego has to feel above everybody else. And I want to get back a little bit to what you were talking about in your previous comment about the idea. Shit, I'm kind of losing a little bit. Oh, lost my thoughts. You throw too much stuff at me too quick, Dominic. But you're absolutely right in this sense of the ego. And I've always said that when it comes to bad decisions people make, it always happens because you're dealing with emotions. And I still will hold true to that. But a lot of times it's a coupling of the emotions and the ego. And a lot of times the ego drives the emotions, right? But no matter who's driving those emotions, the fact that they exist at all. And I think that you could probably make a sound decision if your ego was involved and your emotions weren't. Is it possible for that to happen? I don't know. But man, I'm still trying to sort through the earlier thoughts. I so badly wanted to respond to that, but I can't remember what it was. Let me ask you this though. This is directly at you, Dominic. When it comes to the idea that in Stoicism, obviously, you're best served to make decisions outside of emotions, right? To respond, not react, and response only comes when emotions have been, you're aware of them and you've processed them in a way. But do you not need to hold on to some attachment to the emotions to continue that awareness? And what I mean by that is, let's say you're, again, I'm trying to think of hypotheticals here because I don't have anything. I don't know. I'll just leave the question as that. Do you think that there needs to be any sort of attachment to emotions at all
First
in
of
order to
all,
make a wise decision?
everything is emotion, energy, emotion. And on top of that, I've never said nothing about controlling anything. I just asked you to for yourself, you can observe them. The ego needs to be observed. Hence, know thyself is a good step. Observe this self is another step. There's the observer of the observed, and then you realize you're in an objective realm. And you use words to describe things. That's all you do. But then there's also the essence. So again, that's all energy and emotions. Your senses are emotion, energy, emotion. Your reason, your thinking, your feeling, your touching. Again, I'm regurgitating myself. Touch is actually senses. But you should be able, with other different parts of your energy and motion, to question it. You should be able to be teachable, meaning that are you able to question your own reason, not others? That's usually an indication of one's defending and attacking. That's their likes and dislikes. And most people never bring them in the same room. So now if you can ponder everything that you see in that room, where am I seeing the words, let alone the thoughts? That's energy in motion. And then we see things like in a concept like water. Water shapeshifts to different elements. So do thoughts. So do reasons. Our blood, or some people might profess to say that they're memory cells, like salt in water. It's memory cells, because you need a basis of memory. Our programs, like the Siri, come in after the computer's been made? Yes. Same with us. Do we come in after? Now, people have to pose that ideal as a pondery, because now they're going to challenge their program, or whatever you want to call it. Some people like using program because we're living in an age of, it's a matrix, all that. That's fine. If whatever words gets a person to at least inquire from oneself. But if you're defending oneself by saying, well, I don't agree with you, I disagree with you, based on what? The words that we're saying? Because you're not in my senses. So if you were in my senses, that's a different conversation. But when we say it, that's the reacting part. And that validates that we're not in control, unless you're saying a person's consciously reacting.
So when I said earlier that I disagree with you, would I have been better served to say I disagree with the words that you're coming out of you? Or are you saying that disagreeing with somebody is you're not capable of disagreeing with somebody?
What I'm saying, Eric, is a lot of times things resonate with each other. When a person says they agree or disagree, it's kind of like having the concept of pleasure as opposed to resistance to pain, or sweet with the sour. I get the duality, but if you can observe both of them, then you're in that position of the Stoic. You're having discernment. Who am I to interfere?
Sure.
Now, when a person poses themselves, you're speaking after thoughts. Imagine if you catch it before thoughts. Well, why would I say that? And especially if you start using discernment. Can I see it through another person's sense? Not really. So then what am I actually agreeing or disagreeing with? Am I going to start talking about sounds and frequency? And then using numbers to gauge it? People like to play the 432 and 440. There's many frequencies throughout this realm, and they govern many things like the trees, the body, the water, and everything, all that stuff. So when you're saying that, it's almost like a person delaying it. Okay, well, before I go on, no, ponder for yourself. This is why we get into a state of meditation. Meditation just means to listen. But to who? Am I listening to my ego that's been programmed? The best way I describe the ego, Eric, to anybody, you turn on your phone, you see that app, that's your ego. There's one of your personas. And then you have a hard drive running behind where other people might call it the higher self. But those are both programs. We're experiencing the vessel, let alone we're experiencing thoughts. But then you have to question things like, oh, so I went to school, I learned a whole bunch of symbols, I learned 1,000 words. Why do I know 1,000,000 words? And why am I not able, if I truly believe I can control anything, I should be able to speak French by afternoon, let alone Greek or Sanskrit. Because there's limitations to the program. I can't run like Usain Bolt, but I can run nevertheless. But for me to have discernment, say, Dominic, do you want to will your way and say, okay, I'm going to practice for 20 years to come to the same realization? I still can't run like that human being. So instead of doing that, honor him. I can't say I agree or disagree because I can't see it. Now I'm just acting a little bit foolish right now, Eric, but I'm allowed to play the many personas. Anyway, I went on.
No, I understand that, but I'm stuck on the fact that, you know, what I essentially get from you is that I shouldn't disagree with anybody. At least I shouldn't vocalize that I should never say that, because as an abstract concept, disagreeing with somebody is futile. Am I wrong?
That's your defense mechanism speaking. I'm not saying, I'm just saying to observe them.
Okay.
If you
Eric?
observe them, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so Eric, you had mentioned that you take a pill, the fun pill sometimes with your wife, and then you went too much information. So in my area of my wheelhouse, my expertise, I would say if we can't talk about good sex, we can't talk about bad sex. And because I'm going to be talking about a lot of bad sex, let's talk about some good sex. So something like that.
No, and I mean, look, in that moment, I made the discernment that there was no need, there was no purpose to me continuing the conversation in that realm, right? That anything beyond that was really just going to be gratuitous, because I can make my point in other ways. But I do have a lot of pushback to this idea that you have, Dominic, and you're right. It very well could just be my ego. I would sit here and like to say that it's not, and it's not a defensive mechanism, and going back to the original premise, it's almost like it's been lost to me. But it was the idea essentially that, see, I've lost it. I don't remember what the original thought was that I said that I disagree with you over was.
Eric, the best thing I could say, Eric, the ego's most people never really challenge their ego. They really never challenge it. For me, I have to do it, and I'm only doing it for myself because I'm always the student for myself. I'm getting to see it in other people. It's not because I've never experienced that. Oh, that can't possibly be. Based on what?
Yeah.
I just have to give a simple professor. So listen. So where do you see the words on the words you speak, or let alone the thought you have on that object, or let alone who taught you how to breathe? Well, I don't know, Dom. So then you're not really a teacher yet, then, are you? Now they might get all upset. I said, now you're revealing your feelings. They're not developed. Most people never develop their feeling, Eric. And the fact that you're going on a little bit about, well, you're being very intellectualized about it, which is fine, but you have to have discernment, bring in your compassion, go within oneself and say, okay, so who is this character? Does it matter? Does it matter what he looks like or how he talks? You have discernment on the words. So I don't care if a guy named Jesus, Socrates existed. What was written? That's what you can have discernment, regardless if they even wrote it. Sorry about that, Alex.
Go ahead, Alex.
Thanks. Yeah, it's rare to see Eric get lost. Usually Eric is so eloquent and to able to articulate and answer people's question. I have to say, Dominic, you got me lost all the time. I don't really know what you are talking about. Maybe your topic, your question is so abstract. I really don't know what they are talking. It's so abstract. I'm not sure we should even be talking about those stuff. I don't really understand. Like when you asking what is control, I think of us have the basic idea what is control and what can we control. But if you ask those very like, how do I say that? Those like very spiritual ideas of things, that could be a whole lot of other topics, and which I'm not sure of us really very excited to talk about that. And speaking of ego, right? Like since like I feel like ego or That's ego. It's just something you feel like something should be doing, or how it's supposed to be. Is like detached from reality, or like as objectivity. And yeah, so this could be my ego. I feel like if we want to talk about something, we want the audience, everyone involved to care, right? Not about I care, right? So that will be ego, right? Since I like something, how they should be, right? So I feel what you are talking about seems like just get me lost, like constantly. I don't know what we are talking about. Yeah, yeah, that's it for me.
I get it, Alex. A lot of people, Stoicism is not just about reason, it's esoterical. There's the metaphysical, that's part of Stoicism. Stoicism is just not to entertain the thinking process. It's like going to a spiritual group and thinking it's nothing but absent of physical. No, you have to include all that stuff. So unless you're going to study from within, I always tell my friends all the time, I said, you can hear me all you want, but I can only hope that you're going to listen to yourself from within. If you don't understand, the word gives it away, understand. It's for you to understand. And if something comes in your presence, it's going to challenge you. And if it doesn't challenge you, because most times growth comes from challenge. It doesn't come from, oh, that's nice. It fits into my paradigm and all that kind of stuff. That's why religion and state usually falters. Because people don't question it. Like I said earlier, traditions usually die because people don't know enough to question it. To question others is the way of defending it. My religion is better than your religion based on what? Still human factors. So get to know thyself. You're being honest with yourself, which is fine. You're being honest with yourself. But this is where people go from being smart to clever opposed to wise. You're also being clever with the self. I'm nobody in the equation. I'm just sharing a bunch of words that I'm experiencing and I'm sharing out loud. If I'm being clever, that's still for me to learn.
You drop so many topics so fast.
Yeah, Dominic, I think one of the issues is that you're covering a lot. I mean, you're going through a lot of different ideas versus what the main theme of today is. One of my skills that I've instilled in myself is to check my objective, and we've lost the objective a little bit when we're talking about living within oneself. And now we're talking about really how the ego fits into that. And this isn't a conversation on the ego, but I will say this, I don't know if you being a person, if a human being, I'm really struggling with this idea that you've thrown at me, because I do enjoy it. It's this idea that you can't disagree with somebody, right? Because who are you to disagree with? That's ultimately what it is, right? If you're essentially saying that my idea is better than yours and that's why I disagree with it, right? And the great thing for me is I don't have to say any of that because this isn't my idea. It's Stoicism's principle. So I would like to think that my ego is never of the equation, at least when it comes to this group, other than the one that I've tagged myself to moderate it and host it and say a few words at the beginning to kick things off and come in here in between and try to tie things up and congratulate and celebrate the words that people have. Or I also believe it would be my duty as a host of this group to correct misinformation as I see it. And that's my only, role here. Other than that, any other comments that I may make really is my ego speaking, right? Why would I tell you a story about a motorcycle accident if I don't think that you have something to gain from it? But I think it also does go with the entire theme here of, living within yourself. And then if you're going to step outside of yourself and try to educate others or give gifts of wisdom to others, you better do so with some fucking credibility, right? And if you don't have a lesson learned in the imaginative story that you're coming with, then keep your mouth shut is my take on it. So I think that it's everybody's duty and obligation to share wisdom that's universal. But how is your wisdom, how do you know if it's the truth or not? And I think we find that out by throwing it out there in the marketplace of ideas. And if it comes back like any peer-reviewed paper and it's got a bunch of red all over it, then shut up and go revisit your ideas and go find another experience that you can use as an example to give to somebody. But I don't know if there's a benefit to debating individual ideas like that in this. Now, Dominic, that's all I'll say. I think I would love to have any conversation with you that I have time for. But going back to the topic that we have here and checking my objective and how we're supposed to live as best we can within yourself, I will also say this, Dominic, you spit a lot of fucking truths there, man. I just think, unfortunately, you probably do it too quickly. And I'm guilty of the same thing. And you've got a ton of stuff to share. I hope that we continue to get it. But as far as the idea that, you know, how do we wrap this up kind of a thing is what I want to say. The idea that you have to live within yourself, not be solitude. You have to bounce your ideas off other people. If you know, it's like, look at any great idea in the world that anybody ever had that was shared that we know about. It's not like they came forth and said those things from the steps of somewhere and then everybody just adopted them right away, right? You go through a peer review process before it's given to the masses. You have papers that are edited before they're put into the world for consumption. Don't ever allow your ego to think that you're so perfect that every idea you have is novel. One, that nobody has ever thought about it. But two, don't ever constrain yourself to think that just because nobody's ever thought about it, it shouldn't be spoken of. You know, so many times I've come across ideas in my life and I'm thinking, you know, you go and Google it, you're thinking nobody's ever strung these words together somewhere in the internet. And I'm the first person ever to say these 5 words in a row in that particular order. No way. First of all, no, not a chance. The problem is, though, that nobody took the next act of courage to put it out there for consumption, right? So don't, if I could have one theme for today, it's a bifurcated theme. It's one, don't ever not listen to your ideas. Always listen to what your mind is telling you. Always listen to what your mind is saying. Number 2, don't keep them in your head. Put them out there, no matter how crazy they are or how nutty they sound. Because 2 reasons. One, somebody could say, hey, Eric, you're sounding a little nutty today. You need to go talk to a professional. Or 2, holy shit, you're right. I think we need that in the world, right? So there's my theme for the day. Dominic, I want to thank you. Seriously, you made me think more than I probably needed to on this call. But I think Alex is also right that you've got a blanket of ideas and we're trying to drop a microscope on something. So those are my theme. I'm going to let Alex kind of wrap us up here today with his thought and anybody can respond to him. All right, go ahead, Alex.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to bring up, people are different. I know you are way more extrovert than me. For me, I think my idea is there is a spectrum of comfortableness, right? So for some people, they're very comfortable sharing what they have, what they got, and what they want. But for lots of people more introverted, they have to, like me, I need to think it through myself first. I need to figure out myself. So I think the most important thing is know what I want very clearly, or like I have to think, spend a lot of time. I live in solitude most of the time myself. I do go out and social with people, but not that often, maybe once a week or once 2 weeks. Yeah, like kind of, but I feel very good, especially when I talk about this since I have thought it through, and then when I share with others, I feel better at least. But when since like I haven't like topics, or I don't know what I really want, and you know, like sharing with others don't really help me. So what my idea is, when you say don't always stuck in your head, stay with yourself. There's a spectrum of it, and you need to figure out what makes you comfortable to get out of your head. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, you know, Alex, I have to admit to you that you're somebody I thought about a lot in the last week, because I would say things to myself like I was the one that was always going out and having to do things, right? Like I would look at what I was doing out after work, and if I had nothing planned, like if I wasn't going to work out and then go to jujitsu and then go to trivia night or have date night with my wife, I would look at that day and be like, that's a loss. You weren't doing something. You had an opportunity to do something. You weren't living as best you could. That was a loss. And you are somebody that I know. I have a lot of friends like you that are in like, I don't know what it is, but a lot of doctors that I know, like research doctors, and God bless them, they're spending a lot of their free time trying to do things that I have no business even talking about. But I've told them, like, you need more variety in your life. You've got to get out and have a social life. You know, you need to pursue a partner if that's something you want. You can't just have your entire identity enveloped in this idea that you're Dr. of blank trying to cure X. And I think I've gotten it wrong a lot, because that's their existence. I can't compare my journey and where I am today and this feeling that if I don't have a beer with friends tonight, it's a loss of a day, versus my friend Roger, who he looks at it as if he goes out and has a beer with his friends, that's a loss of a day to him, because he knows he's going to wake up feeling like shit and he's going to lose X amount of time on his research. So again, you got to check in your purpose, check your objective. And if what you're doing is in line with your objective and it's not hurting anybody, almost in like a libertarian kind of mindset, that then keep fucking doing it. That's your happiness, fine. This, I think, this letter from Seneca now talks about, you know, and what we're talking about today of, you know, don't go in your own thoughts. We're talking about when you get into the bad areas of your own thoughts, right? And the example I gave of, you know, writing this book in my head and then taking action on it, versus writing this book in my head, talking about it, and then taking action on it. Courage is always one of the more difficult steps in stoicism to tell people to do, because everything else is just words and thoughts, and those are fucking easy. It's the act that's hard. I flipped it on its head and said, oh, the act is going to be easy. I'm just going to start doing it. Well, no, the words and thoughts should have been the hard part for me, when my friend said, hey, dum-dum, your plan is shit. But for somebody like you that's an introvert, Alex, I would never, as I sit here today, I would never say, Alex, you need to go out there and go to trivia night. You need to go out there and go talk to girls. You need to go to a laundromat and go talk to people. Unless you say part of my purpose has to be that, you know, I need this as part of my personality. I need people in my life. I need this. And I don't think to that end is a means that you should live. Check your means first. Check your objective. What are you going after ultimately? You know, if you're somebody that you see your place in the cog of this wheel of life is probably giving a shit ton more to humanity than I ever will, then you don't need friends. You know, it's like, you don't need the kind of friends, at least that I would need. Everybody has their own journey. And I would always tell anybody, I'm an extrovert in the sense that I keep talking because this is the shield I hide behind. Because the more words I put forward is the more words that Dominic doesn't get a chance to stab me in the heart and go, hey, dumb fuck, you don't know what you're talking about. Shut up. Right. But I'm trying to get better. But for you, you know, if your purpose is, I don't know what you do for a job, I don't know what you do with your family, anything else, but if you tell me that your purpose is in line with something that doesn't include all of that extrovert stuff, then stop looking for it. But if you know that you're unhappy because you don't have a social net around you, or you don't have at least one or two friends, then I'm going to tell you, then go get the friends. Simple as that. It's a simple equation, right? Now it just becomes a matter of, you know, the level of, like, listen, you probably don't want the social life that I have. It's hard. I have too many friends. And I only have that many, but I have so many things that I feel if I don't do, I'm going to feel shame that I didn't engage in them, right? Versus I have Roger, that's his real name. He's a doctor in Baltimore, works for John Hopkins. He never goes out. I've told him before the same things that I probably said to you, like, go to trivia night, go to your laundry at a laundromat versus staying inside. Like, these are the ways to meet people. And every time he, like, I can see him get like the cold shakes in his face, and he's like, I don't want to do that. It's not something that I want to do. But then he'll tell me, oh, I want friends. Well, you know what? He needs to make friends within his own department, kind of a thing, right? Because that's his identity. That's who he is. And it may be the same for you. So that's all to say that I have learned to never tell anybody my life is yours. Don't ever try to do those things. And I always hesitate when I try to give people advice. That is such, I think, a toxic mindset to say, my ego knows better than you. My advice to anybody now is, what's your purpose? And can you control the things that you're worrying about? That's it. Beyond that, those are questions for you to answer, you know? So.
Yeah, I just want to get back to you a little bit on this. Yeah, I would say there is a spectrum of need and wants, right? So for people who are more like outgoing or extroverts, they need like a lot of variety of activities and a lot of friends, a lot of human interactions. For lots of people, I still want friends. I still want human interactions, but just not that much. Maybe I need a few friends. I do want friends, and few interactions and not that frequently, right? Just like you said, like spicy food. Some people, they like a different like a amount of spiciness, right? So that's just matter. And yeah, I do think I don't know. The idea of don't offer unsolicited advice is always stuck in my head, because when I grew up in China, East Asian culture, people always offer unsolicited advice. But is in America, people are so different and so like isolated, I would say, because there's so much diversity here, I guess. But I think for me, at least, what I usually do is I need to ask, what do they really feel comfortable doing something, or what do they really want? I need to get a more understanding of themselves before I can offer any advice or suggestions. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I totally agree. And the only thing I'm going to caution you on is when you say, comfort and discomfort, better than anybody, like that's where you grow, right? So if you're looking at and growing beyond where you're at now, you have to be uncomfortable. So if I'm not saying that, like, let's just say hypothetically you wanted friends, if that's something that you said you needed to do, we talked about before, is putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations, versus if you're comfortable now in your situation and you don't have a want for friends, why would you go and look for them, right? And I think that's one thing that Seneca talks in the letter about is, and we didn't touch on it, but the idea that if you are praying to God for things, then you're not happy, right? You have to stop asking for things and find happiness in the things that you have now. And then the second part of that was his idea of his criticism of whoever he was criticizing, saying that if you're asking for God for things in public, but then hiding things in private, Seneca was saying you need to be honest about all the things that you want, pull all those things out in public. And you're going to get, I think, in that practice, you're going to get that marketplace of thoughts to say, this is not something you would want, kind of a thing. So my idea. But Shri, hello.
Hey, hi, I've been listening into, and Alex, I just do want to say, yeah, I come from India too. So there's a lot of unsolicited advice, whether you want it or not. It's very funny to hear that, so I sync with you there. And suddenly when you come overseas, it's very relaxing. You're suddenly like, where's all those voices? Not in my head, outside my head. They're all there, not there. So I did want to talk about what I really connected with that passage from the letter was how you pray to God, right? It's a very personal thing when you pray to God, because your inner beast is kind of coming out and reflecting what you actually want. Hey, I want this, why is that person getting it? So I really like where it says, pray to God as if somebody can hear you, because that's true. Like you're praying and then suddenly when someone passes by or something, and I'm coming from a population perspective too. If you're in another country, there's people always all around you. If you're in a temple or anything and you're praying in your head, or you're saying something and then you're like, so it's about aligning with your purpose, right? And that's a very hard thing to do. It's a very hard thing to actually. Would you actually do your prayer out loud? All your prayers? That's my question. Would you? And would that make us a real stoic, like where your prayer is something that you are okay to say out loud in front of no matter who and what, right? I don't think so. I don't think that's easy to attain. I mean, I don't mean pray to God, but you pray and sit with yourself and say what you want. That's a prayer too, right?
So Sri, my wife and I talked about this. I'm very happy to report to everybody that she's becoming quite the stoic, and she loves talking about these topics each week. And this is the one she was like, hey, hold up a second. We're talking about God. What do you mean? She's agnostic the same way I am. And I said, first off, anytime I see God, I just replace it with nature. But I do have a problem with this in the sense that I don't talk out loud about things I want. But I would think stoically, I would never talk out loud for things I want, because the stoic would be somebody that's lacking wants. But I get where you're coming from, Sri, in the sense that people are going to pray to their gods, and the idea that if you're praying to the God, what should you be praying for out loud versus in silence? Stoicism tells you should be asking for nothing in silence, that everything should be out there for the world to hear. And in that practice, I think there's a lot to be held about. If you have to publicly make known what you want, you're going to shy away from the things that don't matter, right? So if I'm sitting here and I'm praying to my God, saying, God, give me health, give me wisdom out loud, and then somebody walks by and I go do, and then they walk by and I go, oh, and by the way, God, give me a bigger dick. Like, that would be something that is foolish for me to ask for, because, well, it's foolish, right? But it's the idea that you should never ask for something that you can't control, that you can't want, that you can't take on your own to fix, kind of a thing. Health and wisdom, to me, wisdom is something you can go get yourself. Health is obviously something you can't control. So we're getting into the semantics, I think, of prayers and religions. But generally, that idea, I think that there should be nothing you silently want, because I think the act of being silent is going to reveal your lack of humbleness, the fact that your ego may be driving it, the fact that it may be delusional, the fact that you may be asking of something for which you haven't done any work. You know, Lord, make me rich and famous. Well, what have you done? Gotten off your couch to actually try to get some money and with it fame, certain things like that. So I absolutely agree in the sentiment that your wants should be made public, and putting them out into the idea marketplace, you're going to get feedback very quickly as to whether they're appropriate or not for you and your journey, right? So in that sentiment, I totally agree. And we can have a whole conversation about letting my thoughts and wants out loud known to a deity or not. But again, I think that if you exchange God for nature in any passage in Stoicism, you're going to get the same result.
And Shri, can I tell you as well? I would say that if, like Eric, I totally agree. If you replace God with nature, and we are going to say, if we're Stoic, replace God with yourself. And if you speak aloud, because that is praying, if you cannot say it in front of someone else or even yourself, look at what you cannot say that you really want, but you can't say it in front of someone else. What's stopping you from wanting that, or from accepting that it can come to you? Because you're the only one that's going to allow it to come, because we're energy. So that Dominic is right. Like, we are all vibrating energies. And if you're going to pray for something, if you are going to speak as I am speaking, you are going to receive it. That's why you don't want to say anything that you don't want. Right?
That's what I'm saying, that's hard to attain. That itself defines that it's not easy, right? It's not easy to sit here and say, oh, I want so and so. I mean, try it in front of your family, in front of like whoever is next to you. You're going to sound, some things are not going to sound right to them. Right?
That's when you search deep down and say, why does that sound right? Why would that ever be something that I'd be averse to, when in fact I feel like I want it, but I'm embarrassed or I have shame? Let's journal that.
I think of when I was younger, my grandmother, she's long since passed, but I used to say things out loud like that, like, I want this, and her response was like, well, go and get it. She was not Stoic at all, but she's like, so go and get it. If you want that, go and get it. And if I said something like, I want to go play, center for the Los Angeles Kings, she would laugh at me. And it's like, that's the feedback I'm talking about, right? That if you put something out there to your family and friends and they look at you and go, well, what the hell's stopping you? Go get it. That's, versus if you say, you wanted to go be, the center for the LA Kings, they're going to go, well, Sri, maybe not today. Maybe you go talk to somebody, kind of a thing. But I love the concept. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and that kind of stuck to me because I come from a culture too where you're quietly praying in your head, right? And depending on whether you're having a good or a bad day, your prayers change. Depending on if you're having a worse day and you really, really need your life to go a certain way, then you're like, oh my God, I need it. Why don't you do it? I can demand my God, but at the same thing, when I read this passage, I'm like, how stupid I would sound if I demanded the same thing in front of other people, right? Yeah, and like, that's where I need to align my purpose. Yeah.
I get that totally. Like, why are you asking something of others when you should be the one doing it?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. It's like the old comic strip that, somebody asked God to make them millionaires and they forget to buy the lottery ticket, kind of thing, right? It's up to you to buy the lottery ticket. So totally agree. Well, guys, I got to get going, but I got to tell you, this is a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for everybody showing up. You've made me a better human. I hope that next week I cannot, of course, at all recall what we're talking about next week, but just also let you know, I'm gonna start doing some more of those open chats during the week. So if you guys want to come on by for those, I'm thinking like I'm gonna do them every day. It's kind of a thing. So
Wow.
yeah, I'm gonna do like an hour every day. So I'm gonna try to kind of treat this like my second job, so you guys can make me a better stoic and figure all this shit out.
I'm
So-
in.
All right, you guys have a great week. Hopefully, see you next week.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
thank you guys. Bye.
Thanks.